To recap, if anybody missed the first stream, this book is called The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity and Love. It's by Bell Hooks. I did not do any sort of vocal warm-up. My tongue is still asleep. Wake up, tongue. We got to read a whole book. We got to read 3 chapters, at least, or not. No pressure. We're breezy. The early chapters talked about patriarchy, the idea of patriarchy, what it is, how it affects men and women, how women can be patriarchal, how men are victims of patriarchy, and left us at chapter 3, which is called Being a Boy. I think this chapter's all right. We're now getting into the part of the book where Bell Hooks addresses male violence, which is also something that was addressed like early on, but it's going to go a bit more in depth. I think chapter 4 in particular could be triggering to folks. Also, chapter 5 is called Male Sexual Being, and also maybe triggering to some folks. So these are content warnings, content notices of what's coming up, which we should probably pin in the chat sooner than later. I'll describe that as, let's see. Male sexual violence, assault, sexual themes. How about that? We're going to get into it. Getting into some stuff. So we'll read a bit. I believe Ono will pop in at some point when he gets home from work. And then we'll hop into a chat together. And I'll stop reading. But from now till then, here we go. Bell Hooks. Chapter 3. Being a Boy. Boys are not seen as lovable in patriarchal culture. Even though sexism has always decreed that boy children have more status than girls, status and even the rewards of privilege are not the same as being loved. Patriarchal assault on the emotional life of boys begins at the moment of their birth. Contrary to sexist mythology, in the real world of male and female babies, male babies express themselves more. They cry longer and louder. They come into the world wanting to be seen and heard. Sexist thinking at its worst leads many parents to let male infants cry without a comforting touch because they fear that holding baby boys too much, comforting them too much, might cause them to grow up wimpy. Thankfully, there has been enough of a break with rigid sexist roles to allow aware parents to reject this faulty logic and give boy babies the same comfort that they give or would give girls. In recent years, it has become clear to researchers working on promoting the emotional life of boys that patriarchal culture influences parents to devalue the emotional development of boys. Naturally, this disregard affects boys' capacity to love and be loving. Dan Kindlin and Michael Thompson, authors of Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys, stress that their research shows that boys are free to be more emotional in early childhood because they have not yet learned to fear and despise expressing dependence. Quote, every child, boys included, comes into this world wanting to love and be loved by his parents. 40 years of research on emotional attachment shows that without it, children die or suffer severe emotional damage. Despite these powerful insights, they do not talk about the impact of patriarchy. They do not tell readers that to truly protect the emotional life of boys, we must tell the truth about the power of patriarchy. We must dare to face the way in which patriarchal thinking blinds everyone so that we cannot see that the emotional lives of boys cannot be fully honored as long as notions of patriarchal masculinity prevail. We cannot teach boys that, quote, real men either do not feel or do not express feelings, then expect boys to feel comfortable getting in touch with their feelings. Much of the traditional research on the emotional life of boys draws the connection between notions of male dominance and the shutting down of emotions in boyhood, even as the researchers act as though patriarchal values can remain intact. Popular best-selling books such as Raising Cain and James Garbarino's Lost Boys, Why Our Sons Turn Violent and How We Can Save Them, outline the way boys are being emotionally damaged, but they fail to offer a courageous alternative vision, one that would fundamentally challenge patriarchal masculinity. Instead, these books imply that within the existing patriarchal system, boyhood should be free of patriarchal demands. The value of patriarchy itself is never addressed. In Raising Cain, the authors conclude by contending, quote, "What boys need, first and foremost, is to be seen through a different lens than tradition prescribes. Individually and as a culture, we must discard the distorted view of boys that ignores or denies their capacity for feelings, the view that colors even boys' perception of themselves as above or outside a life of emotions." Kindlin and Thompson carefully depoliticized their language. Their use of the word tradition belies the reality that the patriarchal culture, which has socialized almost everyone in our nation to dismiss the emotional life of boys, is an entrenched social and political system. Nor is it an accident of nature. Anti-feminist women, like Christina Hoff Sommers, curry patriarchal favor with men by spreading the idea, put forward in Sommers' book The War Against Boys, that, quote, "feminism is harming our young men." Sommers falsely assumes that educating boys to be anti-patriarchal is, quote, "re-socializing boys in the direction of femininity," unquote. Conveniently, she ignores that feminist thinkers are as critical of sexist notions of femininity as we are of patriarchal notions of masculinity. It is patriarchy, in its denial of the full humanity of boys, that threatens the emotional lives of boys, not feminist thinking. To change patriarchal, quote, "traditions," we must end patriarchy, in part by envisioning alternative ways of thinking about maleness, not only boyhood. Without ever using the word patriarchy, he uses the phrase, quote, "traditional masculinity." Psychologist James Garbarino does suggest in Lost Boys that the cultivation of an androgynous selfhood, one that combines the traits deemed masculine and feminine, would affirm for boys their right to be emotional. In his section on, quote, "what boys need," Garbarino writes, "Where and how do boys learn what it means to be a man? They seem to learn it all too often from the mass media and from the most visible males in their community, particularly their peers. Boys' friends are the arbitrators of what is masculine and what is feminine. So resilience among the boys in a community depends upon changing macho attitudes among male peer groups and broadening their concept of what a real man is and does." Garbarino's is a powerful work, very much on target in the descriptions and information it offers about all the ways boys are traumatized by the demand that they deny their emotions. But it is also a disturbing one because the author himself seems unwilling to connect his recognition of the damage done to boys with a critique of patriarchal thinking and practice. It is as if he believes that somehow all that is needed is a revamping of patriarchal values so that boys' emotions can be supported, at least until the boys grow up. Frankly, it is difficult to understand why these men who know so much about the way patriarchal thinking damages boys are unable to call the problem by its true name and by so doing free themselves to envision a world where the feelings of boys can really matter. Perhaps they are silent because any critique of patriarchy necessarily leads to a discussion of whether conversion to feminist thinking and practice is the answer. It has been hard for many male thinkers about the emotional life of boys to see feminism as a helpful theory because to a grave extent, anti-male sentiments among some feminists have led the movement to focus very little attention on the development of boys. One of the tremendous failings of feminist theory and practice has been the lack of a concentrated study of boyhood, one that offers guidelines and strategies for alternative masculinity and ways of thinking about maleness. Indeed, the feminist rhetoric that insisted on identifying males as the enemy often closed down the space where boys could be considered, where they could be deemed as worthy of rescue from patriarchal exploitation and oppression as were their female counterparts. Like the researchers who write about the emotional lives of boys from a non-feminist perspective, feminist researchers are often unwilling or reluctant to target patriarchal thinking. Family therapist Olga Silverstein in The Courage to Raise Good Men says little about patriarchy even as she does offer alternative strategies for raising boys. There are two major barriers preventing researchers from targeting patriarchy. Researchers fear that overtly political analysis will alienate readers on one hand, and on the other hand, they may simply have no alternative visions to offer. Feminist theory has offered us brilliant critiques of patriarchy and very few insightful ideas about alternative masculinity, especially in relation to boys. Many feminist women who birthed boys found themselves reluctant to challenge conventional aspects of patriarchal masculinity when their boys wanted to embrace those values. They found they did not want to deny their sons access to toy guns or to tell them just to be passive when another boy was attacking them on the playground. For many enlightened, single-parent feminist mothers with limited economic resources, the effort to consistently map for their sons alternatives to patriarchal masculinity simply takes too much time. One of my very best friends is a single mother with 2 children, an older daughter and a younger son. Excuse me. When her son was born, I suggested we name him Ruby. His biological dad jokingly made the point that, quote, she should have her own son and name him Ruby. Well, his middle name is Ruby. When he was around the age of 5, he decided he wanted to use the name Ruby. The boys at school let him know through teasing that this was a girl's name. As an intervention, he and his mom brought to school pictures of all the men through history named Ruby. Then later on, he wanted to paint his nails with fingernail polish and wear it to school. Again, the boys let him know that boys do not use nail polish. His mother and sister gathered all the, quote, cool adult guys they knew to come to school and show that males can use nail polish. These were my friend's graduate student years, however. When she began working full-time, such vigilance became harder to maintain. Just recently, her son told her how much he likes the way she smells. She shared with him that he could smell the same. He let her know that there was no way he could go to school smelling sweet. He had gotten the message that, quote, boys don't smell good. Instead of urging him to rise to the latest challenge, she now allows him to choose and does not judge his choice. Yet she feels sad for him, sad that conformity to patriarchal standards interfered with his longings. Many anti-patriarchal parents find that the alternative masculinities they support for their boy children are shattered not by grown-ups, but by sexist male peers. Progressive parents, who strive to be vigilant about the mass media their boys have access to, must constantly intervene and offer teachings to counter the patriarchal pedagogy, there it is, patriarchal pedagogy that is deemed, quote, normal. Sorry, I butchered that sentence. One more time. Progressive parents who strive to be vigilant about the mass media their boys have access to must constantly intervene and offer teachings to counter the patriarchal pedagogy that is deemed, quote, normal. In How Can I Get Through to You, Terrence Real, father of 2 sons, states, our sons learn the code early and well. Don't cry, don't be vulnerable, don't show weakness. Ultimately, don't show that you care. As a society, we may have some notion that raising whole boys and girls is a good idea, but that doesn't mean that we actually do. Even though you or I might be committed to raising less straight-jacketed kids, the culture at large, while perhaps changing, is still far from changed. Try as we might in movie theaters, classrooms, playgrounds, our sons and daughters are bombarded with traditional messages about masculinity and femininity, hour by hour, day by day. Again, Real uses the word, quote, traditional rather than, quote, patriarchal, yet traditions are rarely hard to change. Yet traditions are rarely hard to change. What has been all but impossible to change is widespread cultural patriarchal propaganda. Yet we begin to protect the emotional well-being of boys and of all males when we call this propaganda by its true name, when we acknowledge that patriarchal culture requires that boys deny, suppress, and if all goes well, shut down their emotional awareness and their capacity to feel. Little boys are the only males in our culture who are allowed to be fully, wholly in touch with their feelings. Allowed moments when they can express without shame their desire to love and be loved. If they are very, very lucky, they are able to remain connected to their inner selves or some part of their inner selves before they enter a patriarchal school system where rigid sex roles will be enforced by peers as rigorously as they are in any adult male prison. Those rare boys who happen to live in anti-patriarchal homes learn early to lead a double life. At home, they can feel and express and be. Outside the home, they must conform to the role of patriarchal boy. Patriarchal boys, like their adult counterparts, know the rules. They know they must not express feelings with the exception of anger, that they must not do anything considered feminine or womanly. A national survey of adolescent males revealed their passive acceptance of patriarchal masculinity. Researchers found that boys agreed that to be truly manly, they must command respect, be tough, not talk about problems, and dominate females. Oof. Every day across this country, boys consume mass media images that send them one message about how to deal with emotions, and that message is, act out. Usually, acting out means aggression directed outward. Kicking, screaming, and hitting get attention. Since patriarchal parenting does not teach boys to express their feelings in words, either boys act out or they implode. Very few boys are taught to express with words what they feel when they feel it. And even when boys are able to express feelings in early childhood, they learn as they grow up that they are not supposed to feel and they shut down. The confusion boys experience about their identity is heightened during adolescence. In many ways, the fact that today's boy often has a wider range of emotional expression in early childhood, but is forced to suppress emotional awareness later on, makes adolescence all the more stressful for boys. Tragically, were it not for the extreme violence that has erupted among teenage boys throughout our nation, the emotional life of boys would still be ignored. Although therapists tell us that mass media images of male violence and dominance teach boys that violence is alluring and satisfying, when individual boys are violent, especially when they murder randomly, pundits tend to behave as though it were a mystery why boys are so violent. Progressive feminist research on adolescent males has debunked and heretofore accepted notions has debunked the heretofore accepted notion that it is natural for boys to go through an antisocial stage where they disassociate and disconnect. Recent studies indicate that it is actually emotionally damaging to young males to be isolated and without emotional care or nurturance. In the past, it was assumed that aggression was part of the ritual of separation, a means for the growing boy to assert his autonomy. Yet clearly, just as girls learn how to be autonomous and how to create healthy distance from parents without becoming antisocial, boys can do the same. In healthy families, boys are able to learn and assert autonomy without engaging in antisocial behavior, without isolating themselves. All over the world, terrorist regimes use isolation to break people's spirit. This weapon of psychological terrorism is daily deployed in our nation against teenage boys. In isolation, they lose the sense of their value and worth. No wonder then that when they re-enter a community, they bring with them killing rage as their primary defense. Even though masses of American boys will not commit violent crimes resulting in murder, the truth that no one wants to name is that all boys are being raised to be killers. Even if they learn to hide the killer within and act as benevolent young patriarchs. More and more girls who embrace patriarchal thinking also embrace the notion that they must be violent to have power. Talking to teenage girls of all classes who are being secretly hit or beaten by boyfriends, who say that they are, quote, disciplining them, one hears the same Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde narratives that grown women tell when talking about their relationships with abusive men. These girls describe seemingly nice guys who have rageful outbursts. Time and time again, we hear on our national news about the seemingly kind, quiet young male whose violent underpinnings are suddenly revealed. Boys are encouraged by patriarchal thinking to claim rage as the easiest path to manliness. It should come as no surprise, then, that beneath the surface there is seething anger in boys, a rage waiting for the moment to be heard. Much of the anger boys express is itself a response to the demand that they not show any other emotion. Anger feels better than numbness because it often leads to more instrumental action. Anger can be, and usually is, the hiding place for fear and pain. In The Heart of the Soul, authors Gary Zukov and Linda Francis explore the ways anger barricades the feeling self. Anger prevents love and isolates the one who is angry. It is an attempt, often successful, to push away what is most longed for, companionship and understanding. It is a denial of the humanness of others, as well as a denial of your own humanness. Anger is the agony of believing that you are not capable of being understood and that you are not worthy of being understood. It is a wall that separates you from others as effectively as if it were concrete, thick and very high. There is no way through it, under it, or over it. Certainly in almost all the situations where boys have killed, we discover narratives of rage that describe the emotional realities before they happen. Importantly, this anger is expressed across a broad spectrum of class, race, and family circumstance. Violent boys from affluent homes often are as emotionally alienated as their ghetto counterparts. At a time in our nation's history when more boys than ever are being raised in single-parent, female-headed homes, mass media send the message that a single mother is unfit to raise a healthy boy child. All over our nation, mothers worry that their parenting may be damaging their sons. This is the issue Olga Silverstein tackles head-on in The Courage to Raise Good Men. Commenting that many people still believe that mothers compromise their sons' masculinity, she writes, quote, "Most women, like most men, feel that a mother's influence will ultimately be harmful to a male child, that it will weaken him, and that only the example of a man can lead a son into manhood. Single mothers in particular are haunted by the dread of producing a sissy," unquote. Homophobia underlies the fear that allowing boys to feel will turn them gay. This fear is often most intense in single-parent homes. As a consequence, mothers in these families may be overly harsh and profoundly emotionally withholding with their sons, believing that this treatment will help the boys to be more masculine. No matter what information abounds that lets the public know that many gay males come from two-parent homes and can be macho and woman-hating, misguided assumptions about what makes a male gay still flourish. Every day, boys who express feelings are psychologically terrorized and in extreme cases brutally beaten by parents who fear that a man of feeling must be homosexual. Gay men share with straight men the same notions about acceptable masculinity. Luckily, there have been and are individual gay men who dare to challenge patriarchal masculinity. However, most gay men in our culture are as embracing of sexist thinking as are heterosexuals. Their patriarchal thinking leads them to construct paradigms of desirable sexual behavior that is similar to that of patriarchal straight men. Hence, many gay men are as angry as their straight counterparts. Just as maternal sadism flourishes in a world where women are made to feel that their emotional cruelty to sons makes them better prepared for manhood, paternal sadism is the natural outcome of patriarchal values. In the book, The Man I Might Become, Gay Men Write About Their Fathers, edited by Bruce Shenitz, many of the stories of boyhood describe rituals of paternal sadism. As James Saslow writes in, quote, "Daddy was a hot number," all children suffer that aching stab of inadequacy when Papa turns his face away. It's just twice as sharp when he's your object of desire as well as your mentor and role model. Only mother love is unconditional, but fatherly love is also about licking the child into shape. Fathers challenge and then judge us, their role in socializing the next generation. In this mythic battle of wills, persuasion and example are the preferred weapons, but if they don't work, the drill sergeant will have to unleash the A-bomb of familial warfare, rejection. Most patriarchal fathers in our nation do not use physical violence to keep their sons in check. They use various techniques of psychological terrorism, the primary one being the practice of shaming. Patriarchal fathers cannot love their sons because the rules of patriarchy dictate that they stand in competition with their sons, ready to prove that they are the real man, the one in charge. In his essay, Finding the Light and Keeping It in Front of Me, Bob Vance describes walking behind his father as a boy, longing to connect but knowing intuitively that no connection was possible. Quote, "Something inhibits me from asking him for what I need. I know if a very young boy can intuit such things, that I am left out of his world and am somehow forbidden to ask him what I can do to have him take me into his world, to hold me playfully or tenderly. The rift begins here. This is the earliest memory I have of my father." To the patriarchal dad, sons can only be regarded as recruits in training. Hence, they must constantly be subjected to sadomasochistic power struggles designed to toughen them up, to prepare them to maintain the patriarchal legacy. As sons, they inhabit a world where fathers strive to keep them in the one-down position. As patriarchs in training, they must learn how to assume a one-up role. Reel explains, "Sustaining relationships with others requires a good relationship to ourselves. Healthy self-esteem is an internal sense of worth that pulls one neither into better than grandiosity nor less than shame. Contempt is why so many men have such trouble staying connected. Since healthy self-esteem, being neither one up nor down, is not yet a real option, and since riding in the one down position elicits disdain in oneself and in others, most men learn to hide the chronic shame that dogs them, running from their own humanity and from closeness to anyone else along with it. This flight from closeness is most intense in the lives of adolescent boys, because in that liminal zone between childhood and young adulthood, they're experiencing a range of emotions that leave them feeling out of control, fearful that they will not measure up to the standards of patriarchal masculinity. Suppressed rage is the perfect hiding place for all these fears. Despite major changes in gender roles in public life, in private, many boys are traumatized by relationships with distant or absent fathers. Working with groups of men, listening as they talk about boyhood, I hear the stories they tell about their father's lack of emotional connection. As they attempt to measure up to patriarchal expectations, many boys fear the wrath of their father. In Man Enough, Fathers, Sons, and the Search for Masculinity, Frank Pittman recalls, quote, "Fearing I didn't have enough of it, I was in awe of masculinity. I thought my father had some magical power he wasn't passing on to me, a secret he hadn't told me." Excuse me. Again and again, the same assumption appears, which suggests that there exists a masculine ideal that young males are not sure how to attain and that undermines their self-esteem. And the crisis of this longing seems most deeply felt by boys with absent fathers. Without a positive connection to a real adult man, they are far more likely to invest in a hyper-masculine patriarchal ideal. Fear of not being able to attain the right degree of manliness is often translated into rage. Many teenage boys are angry because the fantasy emotional connection between father and son, the love that they imagine will be there, is never realized. In its place, there is just a space of empty longing. Even when it becomes evident that the fantasy will not be fulfilled, that the, quote, father wound will not be healed, boys hold on to the longing. It may give them a sense of quest and purpose to feel they will someday find the father or, through having children, become the father they dream about. Frustrated in their quest for father bonding, boys often feel tremendous sorrow and depression. They can mask these feelings because they are allowed to isolate themselves, to turn away from the world and escape into music, television, video games, etc. There is no emotional outlet for the grief of the disappointed teenage boy. Being able to mourn the loss of emotional connection with his father would be a healthy way to cope with disappointment, but boys have no space to mourn. This need for a space to grieve is poignantly portrayed in the film Life as a House. Learning that he has cancer and only a short time to live, the father in the film seeks to connect with his sexually confused, angry, drug-using teenage son who lives with his mother and stepfather. In the short time he lives with his dad, the son is able to develop an emotional connection. When the son finds out that his dad is dying, he rages about being offered love that is not going to last. In Donald Dutton's study of abusive men, The Batterer, he observes that there are few male models for grieving, and he emphasizes that, quote, men in particular seem incapable of grieving and mourning on an individual basis. Trapped by a world that tells them boys should not express feelings, teenage males have nowhere to go where grief is accepted. As much as grown-ups complain about adolescent male anger, most adults are more comfortable confronting a raging teenager than one who was overwhelmed by sorrow and cannot stop weeping. Boys learn to cover up grief with anger. The more troubled the boy, the more intense the mask of indifference. Shutting down emotionally is the best defense when the longing for connection must be denied. Teenagers are the most unloved group in our nation. Teenagers are often feared precisely because they are often exposing the hypocrisy of parents and of the world around them, and no group of teenagers is more feared than a pack of teenage boys. Emotionally abandoned by parents and by society as a whole, many boys are angry, but no one really cares about this anger unless it leads to violent behavior. If boys take their rage and sit in front of a computer all day, never speaking, never relating, no one cares. If boys take their rage to the mall, no one cares as long as it is contained. In Lost Boys, therapist James Garbarino testifies that when it comes to boys, quote, neglect is more common than abuse. More kids are emotionally abandoned than are directly attacked physically or emotionally. Emotional neglect lays the groundwork for the emotional numbing that helps boys feel better about being cut off. Eruptions of rage in boys are most often deemed normal, explained by the age-old justification for adolescent patriarchal misbehavior: boys will be boys. Patriarchy both creates the rage in boys and then contains it for later use, making it a resource to exploit later on as boys become men. As a national product, this rage can be garnered to further imperialism, hatred, and oppression of women and men globally. This rage is needed if boys are to become men willing to travel around the world to fight wars without ever demanding that other ways of solving conflict be found. Ever since masses of American boys began, in the wake of the civil rights struggle, sexual liberation, and feminist movement, to demand their right to be psychologically whole and expressed those demands most visibly by refusing to fight in the Vietnam War, mass media as a propaganda tool for imperialistic white supremacist capitalist patriarchy have targeted young males and engaged in heavy-handed brainwashing to reinforce psychological patriarchy. Today, small boys and young men are daily inundated with a poisonous pedagogy that supports male violence and male domination, that teaches boys that unchecked violence is acceptable, that teaches them to disrespect and hate women. Given this reality and the concomitant emotional abandonment of boys, it should surprise no one that boys are violent, that they are willing to kill. It should surprise us that killing is not yet widespread. Ruthless patriarchal assault on the self-esteem of teenage boys has become an accepted norm. There is a grave silence about adult male tyranny in relation to teenage boys. Much of the adult male terrorism of and competition with little boys and young males is conducted through mass media. Much of the mass media directed at young male consumers is created by self-hating, emotionally shut down adult men who have only the pornography of violence to share with younger men. To that end, they create images that make killing alluring and the sexual exploitation of females the seductive reward. In the wake of feminist, anti-racist, and post-colonial critiques of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, the backlash that aims to reinscribe patriarchy is fierce. While feminism may ignore boys and young males, capitalist patriarchal men do not. It was adult, white, wealthy males in this country who first read and fell in love with the Harry Potter books. And this is where Bell Hooks starts talking shit about Harry Potter. Madge of Honor's in here. What's up? We got to the part where Bell fucking drags J.K. Rowling. And this is before J.K. Rowling became a public piece of shit. Bell Hooks saw it early, okay? This is before any of the turf shit. Bell Hooks wrote this. Though written by a British female, initially described by the rich white American men who, quote, discovered her as a working-class single mom, J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter books are clever modern reworkings of the English schoolboy novel. Harry, as our modern-day hero, is the super smart, gifted, blessed white boy genius, a mini patriarch who rules, quote-unquote, over the equally smart kids, including an occasional girl and an occasional male of color. But these books also glorify war, depicted as killing on behalf of the good. The Harry Potter movies glorify the use of violence to maintain control over others. In Harry Potter, the Chamber of Secrets, violence when used by the acceptable groups is deemed positive. Sexism and racist thinking in the Harry Potter books are rarely critiqued. Oh, Belle, just sit tight. Had the author been a ruling class white male, feminist thinkers might have been more active in challenging the imperialism, racism, and sexism of Rowling's books. Again and again, I hear parents, particularly anti-patriarchal parents, express concern about the contents of these books while praising them for drawing more boys to reading. Of course, American children were bombarded with an advertising blitz telling them that they should read these books. Harry Potter began as national news sanctioned by mass media. This is so true. I remember being alive at this time and being a kid that read books all the time at this time and seeing everyone, including people who never give a fuck about books, go crazy over these fucking Harry Potter books. I remember it was absolutely manufactured. Drink my giant water. Half that story has never been told. I want to know the secret funding. I want to know which reptilian overlord backed the Harry Potter books. Um, and children rarely have an opportunity to know that any book exists which offer an alternative to patriarchal masculinist visions. The phenomenal financial success of Harry Potter means that boys will henceforth have an array of literary clones to choose from. Literature for children is just as fixated on furthering patriarchal attitudes as television. There are just few books with male characters focusing. There are just as few. That's a weird misprint. There are just as few books with male characters focusing on boys that challenge the patriarchal norm in any way. Since these books do not abound, there is no way to know what impact they might have in teaching boys alternative masculinities. Writing a series of children's books for boys, I was initially amazed by how difficult it was for me, a visionary feminist theorist, to imagine new images and texts for boys. Shopping for books for my nephew first alerted me to the absence of progressive literature for boys. In my first children's book with male characters, B-Boy Buzz, I wanted to celebrate boyhood without reinscribing patriarchal norms. I wanted to write a text that would just express love for boys. It is a book aimed at little boys. This book strives to honor the holistic well-being of boys and to express love of them, whether they are laughing, acting out, or just sitting still. The books I have written are aimed at offering boys ways to cope with their emotional selves. The point is to stimulate in boys emotional awareness and to affirm that awareness. To truly protect and honor the emotional lives of boys, we must challenge patriarchal culture. And until that culture changes, we must create the subcultures, the sanctuaries where boys can learn to be who they are uniquely without being forced to conform to patriarchal masculine visions. To love boys rightly, we must value their inner lives enough to construct worlds, both private and public, where their right to wholeness can be consistently celebrated and affirmed, where their need to love and be loved can be fulfilled. Break. All right. Next chapter is called Stopping Male Violence. I'm going to stop and read the chat. Take a drink. I've never read the Harry Potter books. I've taken a hard pass. I think I saw the first movie. I remain pretty blissfully ignorant to the whole world of Harry Potter. Wells, what's up? I've gone back to the JFK chat now. He loved the moon. He loved the moon, and you know that. Morning, Madge. Wild Squeak, what's up? Yeah, dead cousin has two boys, one called Sage, the other called Rubus. Ruby? They both used to love traditionally feminine things, pink, wearing tutus, dancing, etc., until they went to school. ... Until they went to school. That is the tricky shit. Peace, dead cousin. Austin Crab, what up? Yeah, going bare knuckle to fucking J.K. Rowling. Heavy to hear about the time it takes to do unlearning and learning with our children. Yeah. So as always, this is connected to class struggle. Yes. Yeah. Thinking a lot about men modeling caretaking. What roles do men and dads think they should have in the lives of children? Yeah. Men modeling caretaking. It's so often it's just like at the baseball field. I see the worst of men caretaking their kids. I have to straight up have conversations with my nephew about the relationships of the kids and the dads he sees on his baseball team. Like, this piece of shit coach. Oh, I hated this motherfucker. Oh, I was on the sidelines, Madge. Just fucking like, just like rocking back and forth, just whispering to Desiree, just like, let me fight this motherfucker. Let me fight him right now. But, you know, it's like, it's a wild dynamic too, because it's like, I've spoken about this before. My nephew loves baseball. It's great for his self-esteem. He's good at it naturally. And he really he opened up a little bit once we got him on a baseball team. And so it's good for him. We keep him in baseball, and I'm maintaining the fucking facade that I give a fuck about baseball, and I'm learning baseball things, practicing baseball things, all this shit, right? But he's reaching the age quickly where these teams go from being like a group of little kids having fun on a field to being like sports guys doing sports guy bullshit. And the first sign of it is like, he's good. He gets put on this like slightly more competitive team. And now the coach is an asshole. He's just a fucking dickhead. And he's got a dynamic with his kid who's in the dugout all the time and on the team and is now a peer of my nephew, that like his kid is a dickhead because he's being a dickhead to his kid. And now his kid's being a dickhead to everybody else on the team. And, like this coach is just fucking just performing the worst behavior at every game. Like if the team starts to lose, he just starts like fucking pacing and looking to like, getting like visibly exasperated and like shunning his kid, being shitty to his kid. His kid will fucking strike out, come back crying. Now this kid's sitting in the dugout crying while his dad ignores him. So talk about like all the shit we just read about. Like it's all happening right in front of my nephew. No matter what me and my nephew create between us, I got to now explain like why that kid's like that, why his dad is an asshole, why, yeah. So there's lots of men modeling bad behavior that has to be constantly contended with. But yeah, to do the opposite is a full-time thing. Parents fully screaming at their kids to do better. Yeah, it's a fucking hell. Like fucking police have been called to the fucking fields multiple times. Like we're trying to walk fucking 6 and 7 year olds off through just a day of sports, just a thing to do on a Saturday afternoon, and fucking the cops are there with a fucking domestic assault situation happening in the fucking parking lot at the age of 8, 9, 10. And yeah, then these kids will become adolescents, and like people will wonder why they're violent. My dad isn't the best guy in the world, but he was so good as a coach for youth teams, like he really encouraging them to only be there if they enjoy it. Man, yeah, I became a coach. I became a fucking baseball coach last season. I became the baseball coach who didn't know anything about baseball and didn't talk to any of the other coaches, but the fucking dugout vibe was so toxic that the kids became a problem. They were like fighting in there. They were creating like a Lord of the Flies situation. Enough that the coaches noticed it. And at some point, I had to just step to one of the coaches after a practice and be like, "Hey, what's up? I'm Miles's Uncle Bernard. If you want, I was thinking I could stand in the dugout, hang out, make sure the next kid knows he's up to bat and stuff." So I straight up became the dugout bouncer coach. And the little dickhead kids hated me because I came in there like the fucking CO. It's a fucking nightmare in there. But there was one cool little kid who just like wanted to like watch. He would like, he found a turtle or a frog one day, and his whole game was just about that frog. He was like, "There's a frog here," and he was like, I was like, "You need to let the frog go. Like, don't." We spent the whole time, me and him, just in the dugout negotiating with this frog. And he was fully focused on that frog. I don't think he knew there was a game happening unless he was like, until I handed him a bat, was like, go bat. Come back, I'll watch the frog. Meanwhile, the other motherfuckers are just like trying to say the word dick to me, trying to see if I'll get a rise out of him. Just, like, what, Hello, Ono. What's up? Bouncer coach, that's me. Just patrolling the dugout. Coach Bernard, what's up? Don't ask me nothing about baseball. I don't know. Oh no, if you want to jump in, we could jump in. If not, I could read a little more. I don't welcome home maybe. I don't know if you had work today. We're about to get to the real heavy chapter. We just read a chapter about boyhood. We're about to get to stopping male violence. Chapter 4. So let me know. I can keep going for a little while, give you a little time, little buffer, or we can jump in right away. Read a little and then you jump in? Bet. You need to let go of the frog. You need to let the frog be free range while you go bat. Okay, chapter 4. Stopping male violence. We still got that content notification up. Every day in America, men are violent. Their violence is deemed natural by the psychology of patriarchy, which insists that there is a biological connection between having a penis and the will to do violence. This thinking continues to shape notions of manhood in our society, despite the fact that it has been documented that cultures exist in the world where men are not violent in everyday life, where rape and murder are rare occurrences. Every day in our nation, there are men who turn away from violence. These men do not write books about how they manage to navigate the terrain of patriarchal masculinity without succumbing to the lure of violence. As women have gained the right to be patriarchal men in drag, women are engaging in acts of violence similar to those of their male counterparts. This serves to remind us that the will to use violence is really not linked to biology, but to a set of expectations about the nature of power in a dominator culture. Over the decades, no matter how many television shows and movies we have watched in which the hero is the good man who uses violence to win the fight with bad men, many people have long felt that feminist thinkers exaggerate the degree to which men are violent in their daily lives. Radical feminist Andrea Dworkin has courageously and consistently dared to name the widespread scope of male violence against women. In Scapegoat, she writes, "A recent United Nations report says that, quote, violence against women is the world's most pervasive form of human rights abuse. In the United States, the Justice Department says that, quote, 1 out of 12 women will be stalked at some point in her lifetime. The American Medical Association concluded that, quote, sexual assault and family violence are devastating the United States' physical and emotional well-being. In 1995, the American Medical Association reported that, quote, more than 700,000 women in the United States are sexually assaulted each year, or 1 every 45 seconds. These facts address actual physical assault and do not cover the widespread emotional abuse that has practically become an accepted norm in male-female relationships, whether between husband and wife, father and daughter, brother and sister, or girlfriend and boyfriend. In How Can I Get Through to You?, Terence Real includes a chapter titled A Conspiracy of Silence, in which he emphasizes that we are not allowed in this culture to speak the truth about what relationships with men are really like. This silence represents our collective cultural collusion with patriarchy. To be true to patriarchy, we are all taught that we must keep men's secrets. Real points out that the fundamental secret we share is that we will remain silent. Quote, when girls are inducted into womanhood, what is it exactly that they have to say that must be silenced? What is the truth women carry that cannot be spoken? The answer is simple and chilling. Girls, women, and also young boys all share this in common. None may speak the truth about men. One of the truths that cannot be spoken is the daily violence enacted by men of all classes and races in our society, the violence of emotional abuse. In her groundbreaking work, Emotional Abuse, Marty Tam Loring explains that emotional abuse is, quote, an ongoing process in which one individual systematically diminishes and destroys the inner self of another. The essential ideas, feelings, perception, and personality characteristics of the victim are constantly belittled. The most salient identifying characteristic of emotional abuse is its patterned aspect. It is the ongoing effort to demean and control that constitutes emotional abuse. Significantly, emotional abuse in families is not just a component of the couple bond. It can determine the way everyone in a family relates. If a woman is patriarchal, it can be present in a single-parent home with no adult males present. In many homes, patriarchal power resides with teenage boys who are abusive to single-parent moms. This is male violence against women. When Real breaks the silence, the stories he shares are from family therapy sessions where clients openly reveal the way fathers have enacted rituals of power, using shaming, withdrawal, threats, and if all else fails, physical violence to maintain their position of dominance. In my family of origin, our dad, in a booming, angry voice, would often scream repeatedly at Mom, "I will kill you." For years, my nightmares were filled with an angry father sometimes killing Mom, sometimes killing me for trying to protect Mom. In our family, Dad was not consistently enraged, but the intense emotional and physical abuse that he unleashed on those rare occasions when he did act out violently kept everyone in check, living on the edge, living in fear. Usually a cold, silent, reserved man, Dad found his voice when speaking in anger. The two men I have had as my primary relational bonds in my adult life are both quiet and reserved like my dad and my beloved grandfather. Unlike my grandfather, whom I never witnessed expressing anger, much less rage, these two men I chose as partners both needed to exercise dominance now and then through rituals of power. One of them was physically violent on a few occasions, a fact he always felt did not matter, and emotionally unkind quite consistently. My second longtime partner I chose in part because he was a major advocate for stopping violence against women, but as our bond progressed, he began to be emotionally abusive now and then. It was as though he felt that I was too powerful, and that perception empowered him to challenge that power, to wound and hurt. I was stunned that the past was being reenacted in the present. In self-help books galore, the notion that women choose men who will treat them badly again and again is presented as truth. These books rarely talk about patriarchy or male domination. They rarely acknowledge that relationships are not static, that people change through time, that they adjust to circumstances. Men who may have seeds of negativity and domination within them, along with positive traits, may find the negative burgeoning at times of crisis in their lives. The two men I chose as partners, like all the men I have loved, were victims of various degrees of emotional neglect and abandonment in their childhoods. They did not love their fathers or truly know them intimately. Growing from young adulthood into manhood, they simply passively accepted the lack of communication with their fathers. They both felt that all attempts at reconciliation should have come from the father to the son. And yet, as they matured into manhood, both these men began to behave not unlike the fathers whose actions they had condemned and hated. Observing them through time, I found that both of them had been rebellious and anti-patriarchal in their 20s and early 30s, but as they moved more into the work world, they began to assume more of the patriarchal manners that identify one as a powerful and successful man. Though they had not been living with their fathers when it came time to be, quote, men, the early models of their lives were unconsciously reenacted. They could have protected themselves from this intimate repetition only by consciously working to be different, only by being disloyal to the dominator model. No man who does not actively choose to work to change and challenge patriarchy escapes its impact. The most passive, kind, quiet man can come to violence if the seeds of patriarchal thinking have been embedded in his psyche. Much of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde behavior women describe in men who are alternately caring, then abusive, has its root in this fundamental allegiance to patriarchal thinking. Indoctrination into the mindset, begun in childhood, includes a psychological initiation that requires boys to accept that their willingness to do violent acts makes them patriarchal men. A distinction can and must be made between the willingness to do violent acts and actually doing them. When researchers looking at date rape interviewed a range of college men and found that many of them saw nothing wrong with forcing a woman sexually, they were astounded. Their findings seemed to challenge the previously accepted notion that raping was abhorrent male behavior. While it may be unlikely that any of the men in this study were or became rapists, it was evident that given what they conceived as the appropriate circumstance, they could see themselves being sexually violent. Unconsciously, they engage in patriarchal thinking, which condones rape even though they may never enact it. This is a patriarchal truism that most people in our society want to deny. Whenever women thinkers, especially advocates of feminism, speak about the widespread problem of male violence, folks are eager to stand up and make the point that most men are not violent. They refuse to acknowledge that masses of boys and men have been programmed from birth on to believe that at some point they must be violent, whether psychologically or physically, to prove that they are men. Terence Real calls this early indoctrination into patriarchal thinking the, quote, normal traumatization of boys. Quote, when I first began looking at gender issues, I believed that violence was a byproduct of boyhood socialization. But after listening more closely to men and their families, I have come to believe that violence is boyhood socialization. The way we turn boys into men, quote unquote, is through injury. We sever them from their mothers, research tells us, far too early. We pull them away from their own expressiveness, from their feelings, from sensitivity to others. The very phrase, quote, be a man, means suck it up and keep going. Disconnection is not fallout from traditional masculinity. Disconnection is masculinity. This indoctrination happens irrespective of whether a boy is raised in a two-parent household or in a single female-headed household. The perpetuation of male violence through the teaching of a dominator model of relationships comes to boy children through both women and men. Patriarchy breeds maternal sadism in women who embrace its logic. A great many women stand by and bear witness to their sons' brutalization at the hands of fathers, boyfriends, brothers, and so on, because they feel by doing so they show their allegiance to patriarchy. No wonder then that male rage is often most directed at women in intimate relationships. Such relationships clearly trigger for many males the anger and rage they felt in childhood when their mothers did not protect them or ruthlessly severed emotional bonds in the name of patriarchy. Contrary to popular myths, single mothers are often the most brutal when it comes to coercing their sons to conform to patriarchal standards. The single mom who insists that her boy child, quote, be a man is not anti-patriarchal. She is enforcing patriarchal will. Researching boyhood, Olga Silverstein observed, in single-parent families, it's common to see boys who have become their mother's, quote, little man. Often these boys are very bossy children who patronize their mothers, who in fact do uncanny imitations of a certain kind of husband, being alternately possessive, protective, and seductive. Whether in single-parent or two-parent households, boys who are allowed to assume the role of mini-patriarch are often violent toward their mothers. They hit and kick when their wishes are not satisfied. Obviously, as small boys, they do not have the strength to overpower their mothers, but it is clear that they see the use of violence to get their needs met as acceptable. And while mothers of boys who hit them may feel that hitting is wrong, they may simultaneously feel that it is their job to meet the needs of any male, especially one who is coercive. Many teenage boys have violent contempt and rage for a patriarchal mom because they understand that in the world outside the home, sexism renders her powerless. He is pissed that she has power over him at home. He does not see her autocratic rule in the home as legitimate power. As a consequence, he may be enraged at his mom for using the tactics of psychological terrorism to whip him into shape, and yet respond with admiration toward the male peer or authority figure who deploys similar tactics. In patriarchal culture, boys learn early that the authority of the mother is limited, that her power comes solely from being a caretaker of patriarchy. When she colludes with adult male abuse of her son, she, or later a symbolic mother substitute, will be the target of his violence. Years ago, the television show The Incredible Hulk was the favorite of many boys. It featured a mild-mannered scientist who turned into an angry green monster whenever he felt intense emotions. A sociologist interviewing boys about their passion for this show asked them what they would do if they had the power of the Hulk. They replied that they would, quote, smash their mommies. In her groundbreaking work, The Mermaid and the Minotaur, feminist theorist Dorothy Dinnerstein highlighted the extent to which boys respond to the autocratic power of mothers with rage. Like many feminist researchers today, she insisted that male engagement with parenting was needed to break this projection onto the mother as an all-powerful figure who must be rebelled against and in some cases destroyed. Clearly, patriarchal mothers who have rage at grown men act out with sons. They may either force the son to enter into an inappropriate relationship in which he must provide for her the emotional connection grown men deny her, or engage in emotional abuse in which the son is constantly belittled and shamed. These acts of patriarchal violence serve to reinforce in the mind of boy children that their violence toward females is appropriate. It simply feels like justifiable vengeance. Feminist idealization of motherhood made it extremely difficult to call attention to maternal sadism, to the violence women enact with children, especially with boys. And yet we know that whether it is a consequence of power dynamics and dominator culture, or simply a reflection of rage, women are shockingly violent toward children. This fact should lead everyone to question any theory of gender differences that suggests women are less violent than men. In patriarchal culture, women are as violent as men toward the groups that they have power over and can dominate freely. Usually that group is children or weaker females. Like its male counterpart, much female violence toward children takes the form of emotional abuse, especially verbal abuse and shaming. Hence, it is difficult to document. Maternal sadism must be studied, however, if we are to understand the roots of adult male violence towards women. To some extent, the reformist feminist thinkers are who have focused on women as the more ethical, kinder... To some extent, the reformist feminist thinkers who have focused on women as the more ethical, kinder, gentler sex have stood in the way of an in-depth study of maternal sadism, of the ways women in patriarchal society act out violently with boys. In our household growing up, it was clear that our mother believed wholeheartedly that it was the role of the man to be a disciplinarian, to be in charge. When our dad used excessive violence, she merely saw it as his right. Lots of women who believe that it is the right of men to dominate feel that they should not resist male violence toward themselves or their children. Not surprisingly, these women, my mother included, use all manner of violence to discipline children. Fearful of being the objects of a grown man's rage, they may desire their children to be perfectly behaved so as not to arouse daddy's ire. In conversations with men whose mothers were passive as their sons were victimized by fathers or other male parental caregivers, I found that the men were far more likely than other men to idealize their moms, seeing them as victims without choice. While they did not direct anger toward their mothers, and were often unable to even consider that she could have acted to protect their rights, these men were themselves violent in their intimate relationships with women. Their behavior affirms Terence Real's insight that, quote, the choreography of patriarchy, this unholy fusion of love, loss, and violence, spares no one. Mothers who ally themselves with patriarchy cannot love their sons rightly, for there will always come a moment when patriarchy will ask them to sacrifice their sons. Usually this moment comes in adolescence, when many caring and affectionate mothers stop giving their sons emotional nurturance for fear it will emasculate them. Unable to cope with the loss of emotional connection, boys internalize the pain and mask it with indifference or rage. Usually, adult males who are unable to make emotional connections with the women they choose to be intimate with are frozen in time, unable to allow themselves to love for fear that the loved one will abandon them. If the first woman they passionately loved, the mother, was not true to her bond of love, then how can they trust that their partner will be true to love? Often in their adult relationships, these men act out again and again to test their partner's love. While the rejected adolescent boy imagines that he can no longer receive his mother's love because he is not worthy, as a grown man he may act out in ways that are unworthy and yet demand of the women in his life that she offer him unconditional love. This testing does not heal the wound of the past, it merely reenacts it, for ultimately the woman will become weary of being tested and end the relationship, thus reenacting the abandonment. This drama confirms for many men that they cannot put their trust in love. They decide that it is better to put their faith in being powerful, in being dominant. In Man Enough, Frank Pittman says of men that, quote, while most of us want to be loved, controllers are willing to forego love if that is what it takes to be the boss. Being the boss does not require any man to be emotionally healthy, able to give and receive love. Ever since I started writing about love, I have defined it in a way that blends M. Scott Peck's notion of love as the will to nurture one's own and another's spiritual and emotional growth, with Eric Fromm's insight that love is action and not solely feeling. Working with men who wanted to know love, I have advised them to think of it as a combination of care, commitment, knowledge, responsibility, respect, and trust. Most of our relationships have one or two of these aspects. Patriarchal men are schooled in the art of being responsible and giving instrumental care. As a teenager, when I complained about dad's emotional neglect and abuse and his sporadic violence to mama, she always was quick to remind me that he worked hard and provided for his family, that he was home almost every night, and for that reason alone, we should respect and honor him. The fact that men often mix being caring and being violent has made it hard for everyone in our culture to face the extent to which male violence stands in the way of males giving and receiving love. The first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence toward women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. Feminist movement offered to men and women the information needed to challenge this psychic slaughter, but that challenge never became a widespread aspect of the struggle for gender equality. Women demanded of men that they give more emotionally, but most men really could not understand what was being asked of them. Having cut away the parts of themselves that could feel a wide range of emotional response, they were too disconnected. They simply could not give more emotionally or even grasp the problem without first reconnecting, reuniting the severed parts. Describing a couple in family therapy, Real recalls the qualities the wife wanted from her husband. sensitivity to others, quote, the capacity to identify and share his feelings, a willingness to put his needs aside in the service of the family. These are the same qualities, Rail points out, that, quote, most boys, even in these enlightened times, have had stamped out of them. He concludes, quote, in our culture, boys and men are not, nor have they ever been, raised to be intimate. Women seeking intimacy from men often find their expressions of longing belittled. Many men respond to females wanting emotional connection with emotional withdrawal, and in worst-case scenarios, with abuse. Emotionally self-mutilated, disconnected, many men make overtures of emotional connection, only to later undermine these with emotional abuse. They simply do not get that love and abuse cannot go together. And why should they get it? When television shows, movies, and so much else in popular culture gives the message that anytime there is intense passion between a couple, violence can erupt. Teaching men to understand that women and children do not feel loved when they are being abused is one of the primary goals of groups that work to end male violence. Kaylee Hagan's autobiographical essay, quote, A Good Man is Hard to Bash, begins with the story of her dating a man who she felt was abusive and was potentially capable of physical violence. She calls his best male friend for advice about how much abuse she should endure, saying, quote, if I'm serious about him and if I want the relationship to work, to last, there will be ups and downs. I don't think I should run away when it gets hard. I should be willing to tolerate a little abuse if I really love him. The friend looks her directly in the eyes and tell her, Kay, in a loving relationship, abuse is unacceptable. You should not have to tolerate any abuse to be loved. With characteristic boldness and radical honesty, Hagan shares that, quote, that her, quote, understanding of love and power changed forever in that moment. She had imagined that her lover's friend would take his side. Quote, instead, his reaction encouraged me to love myself, to take responsibility for my own well-being, and to reject violence even in its subtler forms. Hagan was lucky to receive this wisdom early in life. The fate of most women is dramatically different, especially females who worship at the throne of patriarchy. These women feel, as Hagan did initially, that to choose to be with a patriarchal man is automatically to sign up for some level of abuse, however relative. Everyday women explain away male violence and cruelty by insisting on gender differences that normalize abuse. Heterosexual women who are single and want to be with men feel that they cannot escape being victimized at some point by emotional and/or physical abuse at the hands of male partners. Collective female acceptance of male violence in love relationships, even if the appearance of acceptance masks rage, fear, or outright terror, makes it difficult to challenge and change male violence. When the seemingly mild-mannered professor I lived with moved from emotional abuse to physical violence, I felt I should be understanding, forgiving. Like me, he had been raised in a dysfunctional family. However, even though he went to therapy, even though his physical violence stopped, he never really believed that he had done anything wrong. He harbored the notion, as many men who act violently do, that I was responsible for his bad behavior. In Donald Dutton's work with men who are violent, he identifies women seeing behind the male mask as a catalyst for male violence. This is from the book. He may apologize and feel shame immediately after, but he can't sustain that emotion. It's too painful, too reminiscent of hurts long buried. So he blames it on her. If it happens repeatedly with more than one woman, he goes from blaming her to blaming them. His personal shortcomings become rationalized by an evolving misogyny. At this point, the abusiveness is hardwired into the system. The man is programmed for intimate violence. Often men who have been emotionally neglected and abused as children by dominating mothers bond with assertive women only to have their childhood feelings of being engulfed surface. While they could not, quote, smash their mommy and still receive love, they find that they can engage in intimate violence with partners who respond to their acting out by trying harder to connect with them emotionally, hoping that the love offered in the present will heal the wounds of the past. If only one party in a relationship is working to create love, to create the space of emotional connection, the dominator model remains in place and the relationship just becomes a site for continuous power struggle. Women who stay in long-term relationships with men who are emotionally abusive or violent usually end up closing the door to their hearts. They stop working to create love. Often they stay in these relationships because a basic cynicism, rooted in their experience, affirms that most men are emotionally withholding, so they do not believe that they can find a loving relationship with any man. When I wanted to leave my first longtime partner who had been continuously emotionally abusive and occasionally physically abusive, it was other women, my mother, close friends, acquaintances, who cautioned me about ending the relationship, letting me know that the man I was with was better than most men, that I was lucky. Leaving him was a gesture of self-love and self-reliance that I have not regretted. Yet I found that the observations of the women who cautioned me about what most men were like were fairly accurate. The man I had lived with in partnership for almost 15 years exhibited a mixture of patriarchal masculinity and alternative masculinity. We met during the heyday of feminist movement, and he was willing to work at creating gender equality. As it is for many men today, it was much easier for him to accept equal pay for equal work, sharing housework and reproductive rights, than it was for him to accept the need for shared emotional development. It is more difficult for men to do the work of emotional development because this work requires individuals to be emotionally aware, to feel. Patriarchy rewards men for being out of touch with their feelings. Whether engaged in acts of violence against women and children or weaker men, or in the socially sanctioned violence of war, men are better able to fulfill the demands of patriarchy if they do not feel. Men of feeling often find themselves isolated from other men. This fear of isolation often acts as the mechanism to prevent males from becoming more emotionally aware. When large numbers of young men in this nation rebelled against patriarchy to oppose the war in Vietnam, many of them were concerned with justice. Many of them did not want to kill, but a great many simply did not want to die. To oppose war and the imperialism that promotes war placed these young men at odds with imperialistic white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. They suffered by choosing to take a stand. They were ridiculed by other men, more often than not represented as traitors. In the past 10 years, mass media have produced a number of movies aimed at boys that glorify war. Saving Private Ryan, Independence Day, Men in Black, Black Hawk Down, Pearl Harbor, to name a few. That once again make it appear heroic to die alone, away from home, fighting for a cause you may or may not understand. These movies are part of patriarchal anti-feminist backlash. They glorify the patriarchal masculinity that enlightened women and men critique. They serve as propaganda, recruiting the hearts and imaginations of boys. Like gangster rap, they celebrate male violence on all fronts, including the domination of women. Conservative mass media offer daily lessons in patriarchal pedagogy. They tell boys what they must do to be men. In those homes where enlightened fathers daily work to repudiate violence, television reaffirms its importance, making courting death glamorous and sexy. Poor and working-class male children and grown men often embody the worst strains of patriarchal masculinity, acting out violently because it is the easiest, cheapest way to declare one's manhood. If you cannot prove that you are, quote, much of a man by becoming president, or becoming rich, or becoming a public leader, or becoming a boss, then violence is your ticket into the patriarchal manhood contest, and your ability to do violence levels the playing field. On that field, the field of violence, any man can win. Men who win on patriarchal terms end up losing in terms of their substantive quality of life. They choose patriarchal manhood over loving connection, first foregoing self-love and then the love they could give and receive that would connect them to others. Feminist researchers have long since exposed the widespread domestic violence in our society. Yet since that exposure, violence against women has not declined, and in some cases it has intensified. Anti-feminist pundits seek to blame the intensification of male violence on women's greater equality. Yet most studies of family life indicate that in that sphere, gender relations did not undergo any major revolution. Sociologist Arlie Hochschild has provided important data showing that domestic gender dynamics between men and women remain fairly sexist. Women work outside the home but continue to do the lion's share of work in the home. Of course, men who were covert misogynists before feminist movement felt more entitled to unleash their rage overtly as the movement gained momentum, but the rage was already present. Male violence in general has intensified, not because feminist gains offer women greater freedom, but rather because men who endorse patriarchy discovered along the way that the patriarchal promise of power and domination is not easy to fulfill, and in those rare cases where it is fulfilled, men find themselves emotionally bereft. Elon Musk. The patriarchal manhood that was supposed to satisfy does not. And by the time this awareness emerges, most patriarchal men are isolated and alienated. They cannot go back and reclaim a past happiness or joy, nor can they go forward. To go forward, they would need to repudiate the patriarchal thinking that their identity has been based on. Rage is the easy way back to a realm of feeling. It can serve as the perfect cover, masking feelings of fear and failure. My father and mother have been married now for more than 50 years. Dad has never relinquished his patriarchal status, and she has never challenged it. Yet by clinging to patriarchal thinking, they forfeited their chance to be happy together. The threat of violence, of emotional abuse, is always there, standing in the way of intimacy, keeping them from forgiving one another and starting over. Sadly, they are stuck in the trap of patriarchy, and it remains the breeding ground for everyday violence, the subtle, intimate terrorism that intensifies resentment and closes off the possibility of knowing joy. It is not easy for males, young or old, to reject the codes of patriarchal masculinity. Men who choose against violence are simultaneously choosing against patriarchy, whether they can articulate that choice or not. In his insightful essay, Gender Politics of Men, R.W. Connell calls attention to the fact that men who oppose patriarchy remain at odds with the world they are living in. Men who try to develop a politics in support of feminism, whether gay or straight, are not in for an easy ride. They are likely to be met with derision from many other men and from some women. It is almost a journalistic cliche that women despise sensitive New Age guys. They will not necessarily get warm support from feminist women. Ultimately, the men who choose against violence, against death, do so because they want to live fully and well, because they want to know love. These are men who are true heroes, the men whose lives we need to know about, honor, and remember. And that's the end of that chapter. We should probably get to some conversation I've read for a long time. Although I think the time change makes it so we got a little more time than I thought we did. But I'm assuming we're not going to go into the next chapter. I'm assuming we're going to leave it there. I think Ono's in the place to be. Hi, Llama. Willow the Wisps. Book time, good time. Hell yeah. It's going down. Yeah. All right, let's jump in a call. We'll leave it there. That's the book. If you liked what you heard, it's called The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity and Love. Grab yourself a copy. Don't get it from Amazon. Try AK Press or something. Cool. So I'm going to hop into the chat now with Ohnodotjpeg. Also, in case you missed it, our Discord server has got a general discussion channel where there's a form. There's a web form there, and you can enter comments, enter questions. We have some way to look through them. I don't know. Maybe Ono. I don't know how to look at them. But I'm going to hop in a voice call. Get Ono on the line. Reconfigure my scene. Get ready for the big interview here. Let's see. Let's make me a little smaller. Put me over here. We need a manly backdrop. We're about to do man talks. Okay. What do I got here? What do I got? Oh, that's Nanoland. Here we go. Campfire. Yes. We'll do it by campfire today. Flip horizontal. Huh? Huh? Oh. Look at this. Huh? How's this? How's this? You feeling it? You feeling the masculine vibes? Coming off this, we were in the locker room last week, trying to switch it up. I don't know. We also realized last week masculinity isn't a thing, so technically any backdrop would be fine, but I'm going with cliche. I'm going with cliche because it's a little funny. We're at the campfire. Let's roast a marshmallow. Oh no. Let's hop in. How did we do this? How do I do anything? No. I'm waking up. I'm waking up slowly. I read a book today. Hope y'all dig it. I know chat slows down. People are listening. It's dense. But I think it's good. Find the Ono DM window. Call Ono. But first, check your settings. Make sure that the output is going to the same place. Do I talk to myself? Maybe. Maybe I do. Sometimes. Okay, I think it'll be good there. No, Ono's not on fire. Don't. It doesn't hurt Ono to be there. Okay. Start a voice call. See if it works. Roll the dice.